Look at your watch or check your phone. Seriously, do it right now. Why are there 60 seconds in a minute? Why are there 60 minutes in an hour? Why isn't it 10 or 100? Because 4,000 years ago, some guys sitting in the mud in modern-day Iraq decided that 60 was the perfect number. We are literally living in their timeline. Welcome to Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Usually, when we think of ancient history, we think of dusty museums and boring dates. But the story of Mesopotamia isn't boring. It's actually insane. This is the story of the first ever cities, the invention of beer, the first professional army, the first Yelp reviews, and the first guy to conquer the world just to prove a point. It is the story of how humanity went from surviving to civilization. So grab a drink, preferably a thick barley beer, and let's dig in. First, we need to delete the map you have in your head. When you think of Iraq today, you probably picture a dry desert. But rewind 4,000 years. The climate was completely different. Back then, the waters of the Persian Gulf reached much further inland. The coastline was different. The southern part of the country wasn't a desert. It was a massive, lush swamp. Imagine 10-foot-tall reeds, water buffalo swimming in the channels, and humidity that would make Florida look like a desert. It was so fertile that when the Greek historian Herodotus visited thousands of years later, he basically freaked out. He wrote that the wheat and barley grew so tall, nobody back in Greece would believe him if he wrote it down. Many scholars actually think this specific landscaper marshes of southern Iraq was the inspiration for the biblical Garden of Eden. But living there wasn't a vacation, it was hard work. There was no stone. There were no forests for wood. If you wanted to build a house, or a temple, or a tool, you had exactly one resource: mud. And that mud is the secret weapon that changed human history. This is the single biggest difference between Mesopotamia and everyone else. The Egyptians wrote on papyrus. Papyrus is basically fancy paper made from reeds. It's great, it's light, but it has one huge problem. It rots, it burns, it fades. If the Library of Alexandria burns down, we lose everything. But the Sumerians, they looked at the riverbank and said, "We'll use the clay." They grabbed a handful of wet mud, smoothed it out into a tablet, and pressed a reed stylus into it. This writing system is called cuneiform, which just means wedge-shaped. And here is the magic part. When a library catches fire in Mesopotamia, the books don't burn, they bake. The fire turns the clay into ceramic. It turns it into stone. Fire doesn't destroy their records. It backs them up. That is why, right now, we have hundreds of thousands of documents from them. And I'm not talking about boring royal decrees. I'm talking about shopping lists, recipes for beer, adoption contracts, and even breakup letters. We have a tablet where a student complains to his mum that the bread at school is stale. We have a tablet where a guy complains that his neighbors are too loud. They built the ultimate time capsule and they didn't even know it. So, what did they do with all this clay? They built the first real cities. Uruk, your Eridu. Let's talk about Uruk. In the beginning, Uruk wasn't just a village, it was a monster. Imagine a city of 50,000 people popping up in a world where everyone else lived in tribes of maybe 100. That's not just growth, that's a singularity. And here is the biggest flex in ancient history. In the early days, Uruk didn't even have walls. Why? Because they were so packed and there was nobody else out there strong enough to touch them. They looked at the horizon and said, "Come at us. We have the numbers." Life inside Uruk was intense. Narrow, twisting streets, high white walls to block the sun. It was crowded. It was loud. It smelled like animals and unwashed people. And because it was so hot and there was no air conditioning, families spent their evenings on the flat rooftops. Imagine thousands of people sleeping on roofs under the open sky. And because they spent so much time staring at the stars, they invented astronomy. They didn't have telescopes, but they had patience. They tracked the wandering stars Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Add the sun and the moon, and you get 7. That is why our week has 7 days. Monday is Moon Day. Sunday is Sunday. You are literally following a schedule set by a guy on a roof in Iraq 4,000 years ago. Part 4. The gardener who became king. Out of this world of mud and stars comes the first true action hero story. Sargon of Akkad. Before Sargon, the cities were fighting each other constantly. It was a mess, but Sargon changed the game. His origin story is straight out of a movie. The legend says his mum was a high priestess who bore a child in secret, but she couldn't keep him. So she wove a basket out of reeds, sealed it with black tar, and set him adrift on the Euphrates River. Does that sound familiar? It's the Moses story, but written about 1,000 years before the Bible. The basket floats down the river until it gets stuck in the reeds. A gardener named Aki finds the baby. He raises Sargon as his own son. Sargon grows up with dirt under his fingernails, pruning date palms. But he rises up. He overthrows the king of Kish, and he doesn't stop there. He decides to conquer everything, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. He creates the world's first empire. And how did he do it? He created the first professional army. Before Sargon War was a hobby, farmers would grab a spear, fight for a week, and then go home for the harvest. Sargon said, "No, you work for me full time." The clay tablets tell us that 5,400 men ate bread daily before him. That means he fed them, he paid them. They were a standing army, and against a bunch of farmers with pitchforks, they were unstoppable. Sargon brought order to the chaos. He was the gardener who pruned the world. Part 5. The bureaucracy of your eventually Sargon's empire fell. Empires always fall. But what came next was arguably even crazier. The third dynasty of Ur. If Sargon was a warrior, these guys were bureaucrats. They were obsessed with order. The IRS has nothing on Sumerian scribes. They counted everything. We have found thousands of tablets that are just Excel spreadsheets made of clay. 5 sheep, 3 cows, 10 jars of oil. They taxed everything. If your city was close to the capital, you paid in goods, leather, gold, furniture. If your city was far away, you paid in livestock. Imagine the dusty highways of Mesopotamia filled with cows and sheep being walked hundreds of miles to the tax collection centers. The king of this era, Shelgi, was a total show-off. In his inscriptions, he brags that he is the smartest man alive. He says, "I am the best scribe. I am the best mathematician. I can play every musical instrument." He even claimed he ran 100 miles in a single day just to prove he could. He was the Elon Musk of the Bronze Age, brilliant, rich, and unable to stop tweeting about himself on clay tablets. Part 6: Beer, Locusts, and Demons. But let's step away from the kings. What about the normal people? How did they survive? Well, mostly they survived on beer. Mesopotamia was fueled by beer. They didn't have wine. Grapes don't grow well in swamps, so they fermented barley, but this wasn't like a modern lager. It was thick. It was like a porridge. It had chunks of bread and grain floating in it. You couldn't sip it from a cup. You had to use a straw to filter out the solids. We have carvings of people sitting around a giant jar, all drinking through long reed straws. It was a communal activity, and what did they eat with it? Bread, onions, garlic, and cheese. But they also had a special snack for bad times: locusts. In the Middle East, locust swarms are a disaster. They eat all the crops. But the Sumerians were practical. When the sky turned black with locusts, they didn't cry. They fired up the grill. They caught the locusts, skewered them, and roasted them until they were crispy, salty, crunchy locusts and cold beer. That was the Friday night special. But life wasn't all beer and snacks. It was scary. They didn't understand germs. They didn't know what a virus was. To them, sickness was a demon. If you woke up with a pounding headache, it wasn't because you were dehydrated. It was because a demon was standing invisibly behind you, gripping your head with its hands, squeezing tight. If you had a fire, it was a fire demon burning you from the inside. So, if you got sick, you called a doctor, but you also called an exorcist. They would use magic spells, burn incense, and sacrifice sheep to inspect their livers for omens. If the liver has a mark on the left, you die. If it has a mark on the right, you live. It was a world where magic was real and everything was a sign from the gods. Time moves on. The power shifts north to a new city, Babylon, and here we meet the most famous king of them all, Hammurabi. Hammurabi wanted to be known as the King of Justice. He put up giant black stone pillars all over his empire with 282 laws carved into them. You've heard of an eye for an eye, but the other laws are wild. For example, builders. If a builder builds a house and it collapses and kills the owner, the builder is executed. If it kills the owner's son, the builder's son is executed. Responsibility was absolute. And surgeons. Listen to this. If a surgeon performs a surgery and saves a life, he gets paid 10 shekels. That's good money. But if his bronze knife slips and the patient loses an eye, they cut off the doctor's hand. Talk about high-stakes malpractice insurance. But my favorite part of Babylon isn't the laws. It's the ritual for the king. Every year during the New Year festival, the king had to go to the temple of the main god, Marduk. He would stand before the high priest. The priest would strip him of his crown, his scepter, and his sword. And then the priest would slap the king in the face. Hard. Why? Because if the king cried, it was a good omen. It meant the gods were happy. If he didn't cry, it was bad news. Imagine if we did that to world leaders today. Just once a year, a public slapping to remind them they aren't gods. The Karen of ancient yore. Now, I promised you the first Yelp review in history. Let me introduce you to a copper merchant named Aonosaur. This guy lived in the city of Ur about 3,700 years ago. Archaeologists found his house, and in one room they found a pile of tablets. Usually, people keep tablets that are important contracts, hymns, poetry. Aonosaur kept his hate mail. Apparently, he sold terrible quality copper. One customer, a guy named Nanny, sent a servant to pick up an order. Aonosaur was rude to the servant and tried to sell him junk copper. Nanny was furious. He wrote a tablet that says, "Who do you take me for? You treated my messenger with contempt. You said, take it or leave it. I will not accept this copper. I will select the ingots individually in my own yard, and I will exercise my right of rejection." The sarcasm in this letter is palpable across 4,000 years. And the best part, Aonosaur had rooms full of these complaints. He is remembered today for millennia later, solely for being the worst businessman in history. Finally, we have the ultimate story, the flood. Long before the Bible was written, the Sumerians told the story of a man named Utnapishtim. The structure is the same. A god tells a man to build a big boat, put his family and animals inside, because a flood is coming to wipe out the world. But the reason for the flood is different, and it's hilarious. In the Bible, God sends the flood because humans are wicked and sinful. In the Sumerian version, the gods send the flood because humans are too loud. The text literally says, "The land extended, the people multiplied, and the world bellowed like a wild bull." The god Enlil was trying to sleep, and he was like, "I can't get any rest." These humans are banging pots and yelling. Just drown them all. It's the ultimate old man yelling at cloud moment. But the god Enki, who liked humans, decided to save us. He couldn't speak to a human directly because of a vow, so he stood outside Utnapishtim's red hut and whispered to the wall, "Wall, listen to me, tear down the house, build a boat." Utnapishtim heard the wall talking, built the boat, and saved humanity. So, if you are alive today, thank the noisy neighbors of ancient Sumer. Eventually, these cities fell. The rivers moved. The soil became salty from too much farming. The sand took over the temples of Uruk, and Babylon disappeared under the dust. Even Agatha Christie's, the mystery writer, spent years there. She was married to a famous archaeologist. She used to sit on the dig sites, cleaning ancient ivory artifacts with her expensive face cream because it was the only thing gentle enough to remove the dirt. But the Sumerians aren't gone. Look at a circle. It has 360 degrees. That's them. Look at your watch. 60 seconds, 60 minutes. That's them. Look at your calendar. 7 days a week. That's them. Every time you sign a contract, drink a beer, or complain about bad service, you are walking in the footprints of the people of the clay. They invented the world we live in. We just forgot who to thank.